So we are very different, very.
What's your position on property rights?
I think that there is we think that there is an argument to be made. Apartheid, by the way, and colonization were declared by the United Nations, that is the entire international community, as crimes against humanity. At the center of that crime is the property question. And that means you will never be able to bring justice to that crime until you've addressed the property question. So the systemic building of the marginalization of black people has to do, in the final analysis, in the first and the last instance, in fact, with property. That is, to constantly make them available in their majority as much as possible as cheap and easily disposable labor. And you're not going to change that until you fundamentally address the patterns that we inherit, which are colonial patterns of ownership and distribution. So we think that the question of land in particular has to be posited in those terms, and we can't have, and land is so basic to everyone's survival, residential. I mean, the township is a result of land dispossession. People live in those spaceless spaces that basically it's about control, it's about bastardization, which become, reserved for blacks in the colonial societies, or non-whites as it were. So the property question is that important. It has to do with residential land, it has to do with food. There's a big food crisis in South Africa. You are not going to be able to solve that food crisis until you are able to go into the question of land redistribution. So that is our take on property rights. We're not going to take Power FM from Given. He can rest assured.
I'm sure he'll be very happy to hear that. You're in a difficult situation, though, right? I mean, in terms of the way you position the EFF, you're essentially, if I distill it, and maybe I'm minimizing it too much, you want to mobilize people against a particular system, against a particular class, right? In effect, class warfare. That's the way I would have described it in the 80s when I was trying to wage class warfare. Do you think it's possible to do what you want to do without imposing on people's freedoms, personal freedoms, democracy, etc.?
We will take, we consider that as a specific ideological position. It's not natural. It's not. So the
what is the natural that you're not going to impose on personal freedoms?
No, the right to own land is not like some natural right, as it were, to own 80% of the land alone just because you managed to buy it. In most of the cases, it's really a generational sort of continuity that has sort of advantaged a specific group of people. We believe in certain basic freedoms, but all law, the first step of democracy is we've got to be, as much as possible, do the things that benefit the majority. And so that we don't go to the tyranny of the majority, we guard that particular tyranny through certain basic rights. Freedom of speech, the right to vote, freedom of expression, association, and so on and so forth. But I am saying, when it comes to property, you're talking about collective theft, which has over the years, 300 years, so that's 3 centuries, has been normalized. We refuse, and that's the ideological, the counter-hegemonic work that we have to do, is to tell the truth, no matter how much a lie is old and has sort of gained natural status in society.
The reason I'm raising this is that there have been a couple of articles in the last few weeks raising a flag, right, that the EFF could possibly become a fascist organization. And I think people are drawing on European history. They're looking at Italy. They're looking at Nazi Germany, right? Where you advocate socialism, it's wrapped up in hyper-nationalism, but it's essentially all about political authoritarianism. What's your response to that argument? I mean, what's your response, for example, to the argument that Julius Malema is dangerous? Julius is a demagogue.
The difficulty with the fascist take is that they've never been able to successfully define what's narrow nationalism or hyper-nationalism. I see a danger there, often amongst white analysts, that they are portraying their fear to us, a fear that we're not responsible for, a fear that has to do with living with stolen property as a social status, as a social existential status, So you project that fear to me, and now I have to come to Power FM and have the burden to talk about a fear that is not my responsibility. We've got to be very careful. And that is what Black consciousness used to warn against, that an entrance of, in most of the cases, the so-called white lefties into the African revolution is to constantly dilute it, particularly around racial injustice. So I will have to be proven to me where is narrow nationalism in the EFF? And I think, I don't know, those people never quote us directly, for an example. The Commander-in-Chief. The Commander-in-Chief is a passionate, strong, determined and fearless leader. Something that they haven't seen in South Africa. He's a roaring lion, and we want him like that. We don't want him to be tamed. We don't want him to slow down, because you go everywhere in the world. That is the characteristic feature that is able to resist and be resilient against global imperial white supremacist invasion. That is what defines the Cubans. That's what defines Mugabe. Having said that, we define our starting point as 1994. We take the political freedoms as absolutely important. Absolutely important. So we don't have a commitment to anti-democratic practices, for an example. We're not going to take the vote away. We're not going to take freedom of expression even amongst ourselves. But we will not slow down, we will not tame down the language that the problems of South Africa's economy have to do with a long historic theft that has systematically marginalized the majority in the country. So these people are dishonest in my view, because after having said that we have narrow nationalism, which is to dismiss a real issue, a race issue, a colonial issue. They don't have a politics, as it were. They don't have a solution. They don't even acknowledge that the power of that historic fact.
We're running out of time. One quick question. What's your prediction for the 2014 elections?
We're going to take government. We're going to take government. And ANC and other people are very scared. By the way, our members, our meetings are being disrupted. That has been another important experience of the past 100 days, is that people come wearing ANC T-shirts, they disrupt our meetings, they beat our members up. In some instances, the police is either complicit or actively involved. Just yesterday in Freedom Park, some of our members were beaten badly. They woke up in hospital this morning. So, and that tells you that people who are on the ground, who are there. The red dust is rising and it is all over.